the Deputy Registrar at Engineers Ireland, the Professional for Engineers and accreditation body for engineering education in Ireland. He's a chartered engineer and has a PhD in civil engineering from NUI Galway. Please welcome Richard Manton.
Thanks, Una, and thanks, Kevin, for the opportunity to speak about sustainability and the accreditation of engineering education. Kevin, if I could just ask you to stop sharing and I'll then share my slides. Thanks. So as Una mentioned, I'm the Deputy Registrar at Engineers Ireland, which is both the professional body for engineers and also the accrediting body for engineering education. So in the presentation today, I'm hoping to speak a bit about our strategic commitment to sustainability as an organization, as well as then give you an introduction to our role in the accreditation of engineering education, and then speak a bit about our new accreditation criteria, which feature more strongly coverage of sustainability. So firstly, that Engineers Ireland has very recently published a new statement of strategic intent that was launched just last month by the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, that the strategy really reinforces our commitment to sustainability. So for example, that our vision as an organization is a community of creative professionals delivering sustainable solutions for society. And you'll see on that slide, just I've highlighted some of the other aspects of sustainability that is really threaded throughout our strategy. So for example, it raises the ethical obligation of engineers to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss. It references our sustainability framework, which I'll come on to now in a second. And then it just shows how sustainability is threaded through our other strategic objectives, say, for example, on CPD, continuing professional development, and in terms of our advocacy for the profession, say, including our communications, our policy work, and so on. That in the last year as well, we've adopted a sustainability framework. The role of that document is to try to bring to life that strategic commitment through a variety of actions right across the Engineers Ireland as an organisation. So we've grouped those under the headings Learn, Live, Lead and Link. So for example, today's event I think very much would fall under the Learn section. So for example, that would cover our accreditation, our CPD, our other sector evening lectures and so on. And I'll speak specifically today about action number 1, which was to embed sustainability within our accreditation criteria. You'll find out a lot more about Engineers Ireland's sustainability work on our website. So you see there just a screenshot from our sustainability page, which for example includes the sustainability framework, as well as our declaration of a climate and biodiversity emergency, which was made by the then President Marguerite Sayers on World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development last year. You'll also see some of the videos, for example, from our Sustainability Grand Tour, and I'll speak a little bit about that at the end. So again, I'd encourage you to visit this page to just get a flavour for all the work that Engineers Ireland is doing on sustainability. Moving then to our accreditation, that while I'm sure many of, or most of the attendees would be familiar with our accreditation function, just like to give you a very brief introduction for those that may not be quite as familiar. In general, it's our objective evaluation of engineering education to international standards. It's aligned with our professional titles, so those being Chartered Engineer, and as a Chartered Engineer with Further Learning Standard also. There's our Associate Engineer title and the Engineering Technician title. That a very important aspect of our accreditation is the international aspect, that graduates of accredited engineering courses are opened up for that, international mobility is opened up through our international agreements, for example, under the Engineering Alliance and through the European Network for the Accreditation of Engineering Education. Our accreditation is quite broad in that it applies to the NFQ levels 6 up to 9, so from higher cert up to masters, and we cover all the universities and IoTs in Ireland that deliver engineering programs. It's an outcomes-based process in that we look at the knowledge, skills and abilities of graduates upon graduation, and that the process then is based on a periodic review of those programs, typically every 5 years, where we bring a panel of academics and industry. It's based as well on a self-assessment by the HEI. The panel will then undertake a visit review the evidence, interview students, graduates, employers and staff. And then the process is overseen by our accreditation board and our executive board. It's quite a well-established process in that it's running nearly 40 years and that we have now currently accredited over 200 engineering programs, and you'll find those on our website. So just to give you a quick snapshot, that our accreditation applies across the engineering disciplines. So that would cover civil and building, elec and elec, mech and manufacturing, as well as chemical, biomedical, and some other disciplines. And as well that it ranges across the levels of the NFQ and across our various standards. And then just to give you an image of the international mobility that is opened up by graduating from an accredited engineering course, that you'll see in the lighter blue is the Washington Accord, which falls under the International Engineering Alliance. In the darker blue is the European Network for the Accreditation of Engineering Education. And then Ireland, along with the UK, Turkey and Russia, is actually a signatory to both agreements. So to move on then to our accreditation review, which we've undertaken over the past year to year and a half. I'll only touch on this briefly because I have covered this in a separate presentation in much more detail. Really just to say that we had quite a thorough engagement process through surveys, conference, workshops, collaborations with research projects, discussions at our accreditation board and a specialist subgroup. And really we wanted to ensure the continued relevance of our accreditation function, and would really like to thank all the participants, including the speakers at our conference pictured at the top right and the participants in our workshops at the bottom right. So just to give you one aspect of the survey results, that we asked the respondents to what extent the Sustainable Development Goals should be covered in engineering education. So this slide, I'd just like to emphasize, covers in depth. So first of all, that nearly all the respondents said that the goals should be covered to some extent, but we filtered this down to just what the respondents said should be covered in depth. As well, I would caution that the sample sizes are relatively small at 50 to 100. But I think the overall message from this slide is that, first of all, the goals are quite important for engineering education, but that there are some specific goals where I think engineers are expected to play a more leading role. So for example, on goal 7 on energy, 6 on water, 13 on climate action, 11 on sustainable cities and communities, 9 on industry and infrastructure, and 12 on consumption and production. You can read a lot more about those survey results and other engineering work on the Sustainable Development Goals in our publication Engineering 2020, which was launched last year. For example, you'll see some information from our collaborations with TU Dublin and NUI Galway on the embedment of the SDGs in engineering education. And that we were delighted that that report was launched by David Donoghue, who co-facilitated the negotiations on the Sustainable Development Goals. Another report that I'd like to highlight is the State of Ireland report, which we launched in October of last year, which is our main advocacy document, which highlights the importance of engineering a green and digital recovery. And it includes a chapter on the role of education for a green and digital future. Again, we tried to reflect that in our new accreditation criteria. So in summary, that one of the major trends from our accreditation review and our international work is the importance of sustainability, particularly incorporating the SDGs, for example, those related to energy, the built environment, water and production. As well, there was a strong response about the role of engineers in developing sustainable solutions, and more broadly, the role of the engineer in society and global responsibility. There were many other aspects to that accreditation review, which I won't go into today, but for example, they would have raised the importance of retaining the fundamentals of engineering and a discipline-independent approach in our accreditation. And that is always a challenge, that engineering programs are quite packed and that we need to think of ways with how the fundamentals can be retained, but also through, say, design the creation of programs, curricular content, to design in things like sustainability. Then some of the other important aspects were digitalization, management, diversity, creativity, communication, and lifelong learning. Moving on then to the accreditation criteria themselves. These were launched just last month, And the criteria are broken into 3 sections: program outcomes, program areas, and program management criteria. The program outcomes are the learning parameters and the content and the relationship between the content areas, really what graduates should learn, should be able to do upon graduation. The program areas then describe the curricular content that facilitate the achievement of the program outcomes. And for example, you'll see PA7 there specifically on sustainability. And then the program management criteria more relate to the operating environment of a program, again, that facilitates the achievement of the program outcomes. So today I won't have time to go through each of those criteria in any real depth, but I would recommend that you check out this video that we prepared at the launch of the engineering criteria last month. You'll find that on the Engineers Ireland YouTube channel. So just over the few minutes I have remaining, I'd like to go through the sustainability aspects of the accreditation criteria. So I've just picked out a few examples. I would strongly argue, though, that sustainability is threaded throughout the accreditation criteria. And again, you'll see certain phrases such as sustainability and responsibility towards people and the environment cropping up really throughout the criteria. The ones that I picked out here today are from the Chartered Engineer Standard, which is one of our 4 standards. So the first that I've picked out is Program Outcome 2 on problem analysis. So the headline program outcome is the ability to identify, formulate, analyze complex engineering problems. And then I've just picked out one of the several indicative graduate attributes. That is the ability to integrate knowledge, handle complexity, and formulate judgments with incomplete or limited information, and considering professional responsibilities towards people and the environment. The next program outcome then is design, and where the headline program outcome is the ability to design innovative solutions to complex engineering problems. Again, one of the indicative graduate attributes is the ability to investigate and define requirements. Again, that phrase, considering professional responsibilities towards people and the environment. Also then program outcome 5, which is professional and ethical responsibilities. The headline is understanding of and commitment to professional and ethical responsibilities towards people and the environment in the practice of engineering. And an indicative graduate attribute is an understanding and appreciation of the environmental, social, economic impacts of their judgments, and to promote the principles and practices of sustainable development. In fact, that phrase links back to Engineers Ireland's own code of ethics. But again, you will see sustainability is threaded throughout the other program outcomes also. The program area number 7 then on sustainability, again, the difference between the program outcome and the program area being that the program outcome is the skills and abilities of graduates upon graduation, whereas the program areas more relate to what curricular content they should be studying. So this program area calls for students to be familiar with the impact of their work on the 3 pillars of sustainability, environment, society, and economy. As well, we've picked out some specific sustainability concepts that we think should be covered in an engineering curriculum. So those being net zero carbon, resource efficiency, circular economy, and whole life cost. There will, I'm sure, be many other sustainability concepts. There are some that we've picked out as being particularly important. We also call for the inclusion of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about those today, although we do acknowledge that the relevance of some of the SDGs will vary by branch of engineering. So for example, that perhaps one on water may be more relevant to a civil engineering program and so on. And we do explore that issue a bit more in the Engineering 2020 report. And then finally, we point out the importance for students to develop competencies for achieving the SDGs. And we've picked those from the document that you'll see on the right, which is the curricular framework for the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've tried to match those competences to our own program outcomes. And I do think they fit quite well in terms of mapping critical thinking to problem analysis, envisioning to design, and so on. Then as I wrap up, one of the questions we're often asked is how to evidence these issues in an accreditation. So I would ask for you to have a read of our procedure document, which you'll find on our website. And there are a few main aspects where I think you can really demonstrate what you're doing on sustainability. The first is in your self-assessment report. That's where you have an opportunity to analyze your implementation of our various criteria. So for example, those program outcomes that I mentioned, And you can really give examples from each of your modules that what forms of assessment are you doing, what content are you covering in the curriculum, and how that relates back to aspects of sustainability. You can also describe your facilities and how you manage the program, and there may be things that you're doing there on sustainability that you could include. In the evidence, which is of course being done online at the moment, you should supply your module descriptors, including the learning outcomes. So ideally, sustainability would be embedded into the learning outcomes of your modules, and that then you could clearly relate those back to our program outcomes. As well, we would ask that you would include assessment material, so your exams, your student scripts, continuous assessment, and so on. Again, that's really the bulk of the evidence, and we want to see how students are assessed on sustainability. And then finally, when we come for the accreditation visit, again, currently being done online, though we would like to get back to campuses in the near future, that there's a presentation by the HEI management where you can demonstrate your strategic commitment to sustainability. And then through our meetings and interviews with staff, students and graduates, again, is a very good opportunity for us to see how, for example, students are really living those sustainability values. Then finally, our accreditation criteria were launched in January, but we do have a transition period over the next year. So we acknowledge that it does take time to make changes to programs, and we certainly recognize that, and we're happy to work with HEIs as you move towards our new criteria, potentially with accreditation reviews in 2022. That during the next year or so, we'll be participating in webinars like this, really to communicate the new criteria. And if you'd like to get in touch about accreditation, you have our email address there, accreditation@engineersireland.ie. So that's our website where you'll be able to find our accredited courses and our criteria and procedure. And then just finally, to give a plug really for our Sustainability Grand Tour, which this event contributes to. I think this is a fantastic series put together by our sectors, our regions, divisions and societies, and presents an opportunity to explore the role of engineers in developing more sustainable cities and communities. So you'll see we have a full lineup of events going all the way to May, including, for example, the World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development, which is on the 4th of March. So thank you, and I look forward to participating in the discussion.
Richard, thanks indeed for that. It is very timely now to have the Engineers Ireland accreditation have sustainability included in it. And I like the way you described it, that it's threaded throughout the programme outcomes, and then it has the programme area itself and sustainability. So lots for institutions around the country and universities, colleges to get an understanding of it. So we'll now move, and there'll be opportunities for questions in the discussion session afterwards. And as Kevin said earlier, if you have any questions, if you can note them in the Q&A box, and we'll be able to manage them then near the end. So our second speaker now is Dr. Anne Morrissey. And Anne is an associate professor in the Department of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering in DCU and a member of Engineers Ireland Academic Society. A past chemical engineering graduate from UCD and received her PhD from NUI Galway. Anne has been working and carrying out research in the area of environmental protection since 1996, and Anne's area of research interest at DCU focuses on sustainability with a particular emphasis on water and wastewater treatment and waste management. I'm really looking forward to this slot, and Anne is going to share with us now what's happening around the country. Over to you, Anne.
Thanks very much there, Una. This is going to be a whistle-stop tour through the various graphical abstracts that we received. As you may recall, when you were getting a notice about this webinar, there was an opportunity to submit a graphical abstract. And I'm pleased to say we received submissions from over 8 institutions. And I should emphasize that these are examples only, not a complete list of activity, but it'll give you should give you some flavor of what's going on around the country. I divided them up into some common themes, and I'd like to say I did it this way, and a colleague looked at it as well and also did it the same way with a little few tweaks. So at least I think I have put the various posters into where I thought they would fit. And you'll see from this that there should be lots of suggestions for best practice and links to the new accreditation requirements just there outlined a minute ago by Richard. So the common themes, I broke them. The aim of this webinar is on teaching, research and operations. And so I broke the webinar, the graphical abstracts we received down into those subcategories, with then either further subcategories on design, specific technologies, teaching approaches, skills, embedding them into the HEI strategy. which is the overarching approach. So I've got, now just bear with me on this, there's a lot there. I'm going to whistle stop through these abstracts, so don't worry if you haven't got a time to study each one. They will be available for you to study after this event, and they'll be available on various Engineering Ireland websites and YouTube channels. So the first one was on teaching design. This is one of if you do sustainability and roll it into design, the idea here is that you're hitting more than one program learning outcome for the accreditation. And I think that's key in any approach to sustainability, that you don't just go, this is sustainability, that it should link across various learning outcomes. So you're hitting a lot of birds with one stone, as they say. So this particular category anyway, looked at various things from pumps to control systems and to real world challenges. So for example, this is one on pump efficiency. From TU Dublin, where they've embedded, they're talking about pumps efficiency, but it's not just pump efficiency from the point of view of energy. They've also embedded it into design choices and the long-term effects of those choices, and linking it well to environmental and financial costs of running the system. So it's more than just pump efficiency, which I think is key, because sustainability is not just energy efficiency. And then we had one on control, which is again similar to the previous one on pumps, where you're looking at how to design a control system for resource efficiency. And it's not just about energy efficiency, but it's also broader than that. So this is another aspect that we got. And then we had one on project-based learning and a design module, and this was for second year engineering undergraduates. I should say that the range of posters went from undergraduate to postgraduate to whole university, and covered everything. So you can widen the scope as wide as you need to. So this one, they were looking at to examine and design a mechanical device and machine that would facilitate the circular economy aspect. And they did it in teams, and they came up with some grand results. So this was linking design in with circular economy and in with engineering drawing and so on. This one was a global perspective on sustainability product design. It wasn't just narrowly focused again on a particular thing, but it was a broader one, solving today's problems for economy and society. So again, if sometimes it's good to, I've seen the next poster where it's a direct link with industry. If you don't always have an opportunity to link directly with industry, you could take a bigger picture approach and look at society problems, and maybe design your final year project or some aspect of your module into solving sustainability problem or a global challenge. So this one, as I said, this is from Queen's University, and it's linked very much to industry-linked student projects. This one was linked with the engineering local company, and the students had to design their final year projects, had to do a design challenge on the small buildings. I think there's a name on this now, which so to look at it from a holistic approach and link it directly to all the sustainability goals. It wasn't just looking at energy efficiency or anything like that, but it also brought in good health and well-being and sustainable cities and communities and responsible consumption and so on. So it brought in a lot of the SDGs into the one project, which, as I said earlier, is a very handy way of bringing linking. You don't just focus on one thing, because the whole point of sustainability that you're looking at big picture, and you're building everything in, and you're looking at the impacts of one action on other actions. That was the ones we got in on the teaching and that. But these ones, we also had other ones related to teaching, which was on specific technologies. Now, while they are specific technologies, they do also are broadened out into various aspects of sustainable development goals. Like, for example, this one on autonomous vehicles. Like, we all know that they're very much coming, possibly futuristic, but they are likely to come at some point. So you don't just look at it again from the point of view of energy and electric vehicles and so on, because typically autonomous vehicles are electric vehicles, but you should also look at it from the bigger picture approach in relation to climate action and good health and well-being of the driver and sustainable cities and communities as well. So you can look at it, you can take any technology and broaden it out that way. And this one here from DCU, which is hydrogen, which is a very topical, a growing topic at the minute. There's also a competition between electric vehicles and hydrogen technologies, and to see which one will emerge for the future. So this one is very active in DCU, where we're looking at hydrogen as a future for a zero carbon economy. And again, you can take this approach and apply it to sustainability in the long run, and to look at for sustainable cities with clean transport, climate change with reducing the amount of fossil fuels and so on. So then we had the teaching approaches as well. The last top is the Capstone Projects, which is a typical way that final year students would do and finish off their studies. And this is the ideal way to bring in sustainability. Again, rather than just having it narrowly focused on some specific aspect of design, let's say you can incorporate into your capstone project lifestyle design for the environment, design thinking, systems thinking, life cycle assessment, and circular economy, and they can be brought in a holistic way into the design of your final year projects. And there's some examples here from NUI Galway where they looked at reverse vending machines, sustainable festival tents, and so on. So you could think of any products and maybe design a way of making them more sustainable. Again, this isn't necessarily to be directly involved with industry, but you can approach it from a societal problem, as I mentioned earlier as well, like take any product out there. And this is another capstone project type idea, which has not just focusing in on undergraduate projects, but also has links into postgraduate research, PhDs and masters as well, and aimed at the construction industry. So particularly from the building and how to link the sustainable construction and to realize sustainable development goal targets. So again, this project took a holistic approach to incorporating the number of and to link them all the SDGs together for sustainability in the long term. And this one, again, this was a very interesting one. This was from a different approach altogether. This was about learning about sustainability by debating. Now, not first year, and aimed at first year engineerings as well. So it's like this is giving students a double opportunity. They're learning about sustainability, they're learning how to debate, and they're also having to listen to other people's point of view. And as you can see from the chart there, people did change their point of view at the end of the debate from where they were in the beginning. So they had more, maybe they had more information, or they were able to look at something from a different perspective. So this is also a key aspect of sustainability, that you're not just focused on your own narrow track. And organizing a debate for first year engineering was a very novel approach to bringing that in. And so this might be something you might like to encourage or include in your portfolio of what you offer students. So then that was the end of the teaching aspects we got, and then we moved on to research skills. So again, the research in this wasn't ground level blue sky research or anything like that. The research, this is on the basis of posters that were submitted. So there was two areas, or actually one area. Both of the posters we received were focused in on what skills do future engineers require to solve the SDG problem. And you can see that they were divided in this particular project, which is an Erasmus project. They were divided down into technical skills, non-technical skills, and attitudes. And the technical skills are only one part of it. They're really the key skills that we need to be incorporating into our engineering development, are the non-technical skills and the attitudes. Now, as Richard mentioned earlier on, the engineering curriculum is always very packed. So how do you're not going to drop some of the technical subjects to make room for all these subjects. So the best way to do it is to have your technical subjects and apply them then in a non-technical way, or maybe you're designing something and you're trying to explain it to somebody who's not an engineer as to how you might do it, and you're bringing in maybe, for example, intercultural skills in explaining something, or you're bringing in your time management or your life cycle thinking or something like that, as well as the technical thing. So there's ways and means of incorporating all of these non-technical skills into your project. And the attitudes, of course, can be done by how you do, maybe have them do a presentation, have them maybe focus in on ethical concerns, and then maybe as well, in the way the project is designed, you might incorporate, by doing the project, they'll become more curious and they'll have empathy with whatever is going on and so on. So you can develop all these skills in the way you design the project. And this one as well, the first one was at a high level approach as to how you might have high level attitudes. And this one here was a kind of a model for assessing how you might do it into your engineering programs. And this would link very much in with the accreditation process, where you're trying to see what actually SDGs do we have already, or how can we already do sustainability within what we have already. And this is a way of a very simple model here as to how you might do that. And again, you can study these things in more detail at the posters later. And finally, then we have some high level from the operations point of view, how to embed HEIs into strategy. How to embed sustainability into the HEI strategy. Now, I only have a snapshot here of what's going on around the country. I'm sure every university HEI around the country is doing this, but these are the posters we received. So first one was from Galway. And they're already ahead of with what the Engineering Ireland approach to. They have a learn, live, lead approach to the way they design everything, from the learning to doing it and to leading out with shared vision and so on. So it's very much embedded into their whole university strategy and the sustainability. And then we have one from GMIT, which is looking at specific initiatives. They've already done a lot of work in the area, and I think they've got some funding from HCI Pillar 3 in this area as well, which we'll probably hear about in a future seminar or webinar from the Academic Society. But they've developed it by doing specific initiatives around the campus and having then outputs and how they feed into what's going on at the teaching level and into how they actually operate in their whole business from the university's perspective. And then finally, we have this one here from a sustainable campus at University College Dublin. Again, it's the same thing. They looked at everything from high level stuff from water sustainability, energy, research, transportation, and awareness. So that's the end of the posters that we received. Before I finish up, I'd like to say that DCU is also doing exactly this, and we have a very, we don't have a poster from DCU on this area, but we do have a presentation from Sam Fahey, which is following on from this. So you'll hear a lot more detail in specifics about how a university can incorporate sustainability into its operations and into what it does. I should also point out that we had a graphical abstract competition, and every graphical abstract we received was put into the competition, as it were, and we had a panel of judges, and the judges' selection of the best poster in line with what was required, what we asked submissions to achieve, the links to sustainability goals and all the rest of it, was the judges' decision was unanimous. And I'm pleased to say that this is the winning poster from Queen's University Belfast, and Beatrice, I think she's online here along with her team. This poster hit all the boxes. It incorporated everything into sustainability. It's visually pleasing and so on like that. So well done to Beatrice and her team for this. There is a prize winging your way to you through Richard Manton will organise that separately for you. So I'd just like to come up with some conclusions then before I finish up as to what we've seen here. It was literally a snapshot of what's going on around the country, but I do hope that it's some ideas here to inspire new approaches, like for example, the debates, incorporating more than just technical stuff into your final year projects and so on. And if you do that, then you'll be able to incorporate sustainability to satisfy the new Engineering Ireland accreditation requirements, which again, there was even from TU Dublin, there was a roadmap there as one of the posters as to how you might do that. And as I said, all the posters will be available online for you to study in more detail at your leisure. So I'll just finish up there now and pass it back to Una.
Anne, thank you so much for that. It was just great to get that overview of what's happening in every corner of the country, and really looking forward to looking at the detail. And as you say, some of them will be a great roadmap for colleges when they're looking to go for Engineers Ireland accreditation and how to embed sustainability into their programs. So, and congratulations to Queen's, led by Beatrice Smith. That's fantastic, and it's nothing like a competition to see get interest and input in what's happening. So congratulations to you, Beatrice. We'll now move on to our third speaker, Sam Fahey. Sam Fahey is from DCU, and she started her career in plasma physics and gained over 20 years experience in the management and administration of high technology, complex, multi-stakeholder national and EU funded research projects. In 2012, Sam was appointed to Sustainability DCU, and working with internal and external stakeholders, she was charged with delivering a holistic cross-institutional sustainability solution for Dublin City University, focusing on embedding an ethos of sustainability from operations and research to curriculum development. Sam has led DCU in a series of initiatives, including the establishment of the DCU Sustainability Council and the annual DCU Climate Action Plan, delivering novel and innovative initiatives. Sam, really looking forward to see how you did it and what you're doing.
Okay, you can see my full screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much to Engineers Ireland for the invitation to speak here. And as Anne said, I am the Sustainability Manager at DCU. I'm going to speak much more about the practice of stuff rather than the integration of it into our programs. But I guess from a strategic perspective, DCU has in its current strategic plan put sustainability at the core. I can get my slides to move to the next slide. Yeah. Okay, so our current strategic plan, which is 17 to 22, looks at embedding, one of its 9 goals was to put sustainability at the core. Now we're currently revising this because we've changed president in the last year. And so there's a transitional strategy in place where sustainability will again be right up front and center and will be across, it will be a theme that goes across absolutely everything we do. So we have set up an institutional sustainability council that has got academic representatives from every one of our faculties and representatives from all of our supporting units. So from finance all the way through to our operations guys in our estates office. And the idea is that together we've come up with a climate action plan for DCU and how we're going to try and meet the targets, but I'll go into more detail on that later on because it's very much focused on metrics and footprints. We had an aspiration for a carbon neutral exemplar campus, but I think that part of the strategy was written when we didn't understand quite as well as we do now what it would mean to actually make a carbon neutral campus. Big part was the integration of the sustainability principles, literacy and awareness into the curriculum so that every single one of our students, not just our engineers, but our nurses, our teachers, absolutely every one of our students would understand the principles of sustainability and what they needed to do, what their role was to play in it. And then a large part was stakeholder engagement, not just internally, but externally, and how we engage with our stakeholders around the campus. So how DCU sees sustainability. So I guess we see it as 2 parts of the one coin. So you have the education for sustainability, which is what Richard was talking about, your sustainability competencies, what we want every student to understand. So your systems thinking, your critical thinking, what are those competencies that you want to build into your students? But on the other side, we find that there's a need for environmental sustainability as well. So there's a need for sustainability 101. So the students understand the planetary boundaries, understand the concepts of carbon budgets, why we have carbon budgets and why we need to maintain those, why biodiversity loss is a significant issue for the planet as a whole, and how as we maintain current unsustainable practices, we're pushing those planetary boundaries out to critical levels where they're going to have really negative impacts on the planet. So we see that we have to deliver sustainability on both sides, not just on the competencies, but on this genuine understanding of what sustainability means, and that it's not just how do we make energy more efficient, in that if we're going to get to carbon neutral, there's going to have to be a reduction in consumption levels for us to achieve that. And I guess DCU has had some success in achieving some of our activities. If I can get my slides to move, they're deciding they don't want to move. Okay, we have looked at some of the rankings. So DCU has reported on the UI Green metrics for the last 10 years or so. And so I started in 2011, 2012. And so for the last 4 years, we've ranked in the top 20 in the UI Green metrics. And this red line here indicates the number of universities that are participating in the UI Green metrics. So we can see there's been a significant growth internationally on the number of universities who are looking at this topic. Times Higher, we came in 84th out of 700 or so, 700, 800 universities reporting under the Times Higher impact rankings. We are part of the Green Campus program across Ireland. And just to give them a plug at the moment, for this year, because we're all offline or off campus even, because we're all online, the An Taisce and the Green Campuses are all coming together, and we're going to do a joint Green Week across all of the campuses. So there will be a Green Week on from the 8th to the 12th of March, where you can get involved from your own campuses, but there will be certain challenges that will be across all campuses to actually do. DCU then also reports under CDP. So CDP is the former Carbon Disclosure Project, and it was a route for us to get validation for the methodologies we were using for calculating our carbon footprints. It's typically associated with cities and companies, but we were the first university globally to actually submit under it to try and raise the profile of how carbon can be used as a common currency to understand our impacts. And in 2020, we got graded a C, which I guess is we could do much better. Okay, and so I'm going to go through some of the operational sustainability stuff. So I'm going to look at just energy, water, transport, and carbon. I don't have enough time in the talk to go through everything else. So I guess over the year, I will engage with many of the academics across campus on identifying projects for students to do, working with the guys in our business school who do hackathons on specific topics of sustainability. So we have a hackathon coming up where we would have 600 business school students looking at stuff like fast fashion or sustainable transport, and they all come together in groups. I guess what I would love to see is that rather than it just being in the business school, can we throw some engineers into there as well to try and help come up with more in-depth solutions so that we get broader solutions to do with that. But from an operational perspective, I'm going to look at what we do. So DCU, in the SEI Public Sector Scorecard for 2020, DCU has achieved 46.8% towards the 2020 target. So the 2020 target for all public sector bodies was a 33% improvement in energy efficiency. So DCU has significantly exceeded that to 46.8%. And the vast majority of that is due to the fantastic work of the guys in the Estates Office, the implementation of ISO 50001 for both energy and water, and in just improving the energy efficiency across all of our buildings and the heating systems. But we also, across the university, have implemented a DCU sustainable energy community. And so where we're focusing on this is trying to bring in for the first instance, the staff of DCU, working with them to identify what SEI grants are available for them to actually improve the energy efficiency of their homes. And I guess given that the vast majority of us are working from our homes at the moment, identifying grants to improve the energy efficiency of our homes is it's a good topic to be talking with people about, and there's many of them engaged. The idea is we get the model running on DCU staff first, and then we're going to open it to our local community to engage our local community on it. And some stuff on water. So water, this is a breakdown of the water consumption in DCU. So in 2019, we consumed 20,000 meters cubed, 200,000 even meters cubed of water, which was significantly reduced on the 2018 figures, the vast majority due to just the identification of leaks and the stopping of leaks. But it's really interesting to see that more than 67% of the water consumption in DCU is in toilets and water. So trying to get engineers to consider the design of buildings and how that should happen would be a good way of addressing this. So one of the projects we got a student to do in DCU was look at the comparison between water in the swimming pool in DCU Sports Complex and the water consumed by the showers. And they found that we consume about 3,500 meters cubed of water per annum in the pool, but 134,000 meters cubed of water per annum in the showers. So it's significantly more efforts need to be put into tackling the showers than actually trying to tackle the pool. This was one project that we have tried in DCU, and it's currently sitting on a back burner, but we are part of a global consortium for sustainability outcomes. And we looked at hot water in public sanitary facilities. So currently, as public sector bodies, we are required to hold water at 60 degrees to prevent Legionnaire's disease. But if we look for hygiene practice, none of the public health bodies would require hot water to actually sanitize your hands. You don't require hot water, you require soap, and you require soap and water, and wash your hands for 20 seconds to ensure you clean the actual bugs off. But there was huge potential savings and water savings. So we did this project with King's College in London, Arizona State University, and partners in Germany and in Hong Kong. And while we were not allowed to actually implement it in DCU because we were waiting for a derogation from Dublin City Council to allow us to turn off the hot water, King's College did, and they managed to achieve a 7 to 8% carbon footprint saving on one of their buildings by just turning off the hot water. But what was interesting is because we did get a derogation from Dublin City Council to turn off the hot water, but we surveyed our buildings and we looked for, were people actually washing their hands? So 90% of people reported that they were washing their hands. But recent reports would note that probably only 3% actually washed them properly. And then we asked, what were people, why did they use hot water? And it was about a 50-50 split. So 50% perceived that it was for hygiene purposes and 50% was just for comfort, that it was a nice thing to do. But I was threatened when I identified a building in the DCU campus, which I will not say which building it was, that we were going to turn off the hot water in it. I was being threatened with being taken to court because we were going to cause a pandemic and kill off half the student population because nobody would be washing their hands and we'd spread disease everywhere. And so it's currently sitting on the back burner because we didn't manage to get that behavioural change, but it has potential for a significant amount of change. Looking at waste in DCU, this is another one that can look for a significant amount of change. We have 62% of our waste goes into SRF, so solid recovered fuel, that goes to the incinerator, so we get heat recovery from it. What we really want to do is, one, reduce the total amount of waste that we're producing, but then get an awful lot more of that waste from recovered waste over into recycled. So some of the stuff that we're doing to do that is, we'll say the student body would run, when they're on campus, a swap shop. So you bring in clothes that you don't use anymore and you just swap them for other clothes. We have run education programs across all of our campus residences, including a 3-bin system and how to segregate appropriately. We are doing a project with the Irish Universities Association, so bringing together, trying to do the sustainability thing and collaboratively working together, working with all of the universities in the IUA to identify common practices of what we are doing. So we've done some waste audits on the campuses, identifying common practices and then the deployment of them jointly across the bodies, using kind of university campuses as mini cities that could then look for sustainable solutions potentially to be deployed elsewhere. And I will move on. Transport. So we do annual transport surveys, so we would see that for our staff body, we have about 49% of them using a sustainable form of transport, and for our students, it's about more like 80% of them using a sustainable form of transport. This is all 2019, 2020 data, so this is not taken into account the impact of any COVID regulations on it. But looking at some of the stuff we're trying to do on it, so using the university as a living lab, working in collaboration with the National Transport Authority, we have the Rediscovery Centre from Ballymun run a weekly bike clinic on the campuses you get your bike fixed for free. We have fast chargers on the campus. We have go-cars for sharing. We have looked at working with Shero, which is a small company looking at car sharing. Working with our Alpha Campus, which is the technology campus in DCU, and guys down there that have developed technology that can provide centimeter precision GPS tracking, and installing those on whether they be scooters or share bikes, so that you can actually prevent people from parking their bikes in the middle of walkways to allow for disabled access. And so the idea of the campuses is that because they are campuses and not public spaces per se, we can use them to demonstrate these technologies before they're rolled out into the broader community. So the same for, as Anne said earlier, we had a hydrogen bus project that ran just before Christmas. So we were trialing a hydrogen bus project with Hydrogen Ireland, looking at its effectiveness, its public engagement, but of course, given that we were in COVID restrictions, we didn't get a huge amount of public engagement with it. So I guess looking at carbon, and I guess we have been looking at all of the activities we would want to do across campus, but how do we choose which ones we should do first or what's the most impactful? And so and I guess we were also probably a couple of years ago charged by the government, as all public sector bodies were, with identifying what projects we were doing and what was the carbon abatement potential for those projects. And at the time, I wrote back to the government and said, well, so what methodology would you like us to use? And they said, well, you've got 24 hours. We don't mind. Just give us a number. And so I went, okay, that's not going to work if we don't at least have an agreed methodology. So one of the projects we took on was to look at what common currency or what methodology we could use to create this common currency. So we did a full project on the GHG protocol. We set our organizational boundaries for the institution as broad as we possibly could. We looked at the scopes. So scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So these were the emissions. And so this is, I guess, a breakdown of the DCU carbon emissions from 2010 to 2019. And I guess what's interesting is that for at least 5 of those years, we didn't count any of our scope 3s. We only looked at energy. And then we started including scope 3s and find that they're a significant proportion of our overall carbon emissions, which allows us to at least identify what we should be tackling. So purchased goods and services, which would include construction, is the largest part. But then staff and student commuting is larger than both of our electricity and our gas consumption combined. And so what we did in DCU is we took that data, put it into a science-based targets methodology to go, okay, so what should we be doing? And we came up with a pathway for what we should be doing to actually reduce our carbon emissions. And then we looked at our budgets and went, okay, this is probably what we can do given the budgets that we are actually in. So where we are at the moment is we have created a climate action plan for the university that identifies the full carbon that we need, the carbon reductions we need. And so it sets the science-based targets. We have not done the targets. We are not going to reach the targets we should be getting to because we're not resourced to actually meet those targets. But a lot of it is calling out to both government and others that there are larger targets we need to meet and we need to be resourced to do that. We've also recently signed a memorandum of understanding with the Dublin Metropolitan Climate Action Regional Office, where we're looking to leverage the expertise from the university to help our city deliver on its climate action plan. And it's a non-exclusive MOU, so anybody else who wants to become involved in it or work with the city as well is more than welcome to actually become involved. I guess coming to the end of what I'm going to say is I just wanted to have a note on the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's very important for us to understand the impact of and they're extremely good, and they've got some extremely good impacts and targets that they have got set for them. But we need to critically assess what they are continuously so that we know where they're actually going. So if we look at this, for instance, as a snapshot of the Sustainable Development Goals Index, and so it measures where countries are. And so Sweden is currently ranked in the 2020 Sustainable Development Goals Index as #1 in the world. But Sweden would require 4 planets to maintain its actual current economic economy. So its standard of living that it has, it needs 4 planets to do it. And Ireland is not a huge amount different. So there are other models out there like the Sustainable Development Index that looks much more at the carrying capacity of the planet to actually support reasonable standards of living. And I guess on this one, Sweden ranks number 144th in the world, whereas Cuba ranks #1 and Ireland is number 129. So it's really important to actually have this critical systems analysis of what we're actually looking at so that we're not just following one index and going, okay, let's just go for that. So the other one was looking at SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth. And I even see the European Commission is now starting to change their position on growth, and it's growth without economic growth. And looking at this donut economics, where we have this sweet spot or green spot in the middle, where we need to meet internally within the donut the actual needs of society. But if we go outside the donut, we push those planetary boundaries so that we cannot, outside of their reasonable limits. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Sam, thank you so much for that. What a comprehensive overview of all the work you're doing in DCU. So congratulations for that. I know every college in the country have their sustainability plans in place and working on them. So there's lots to learn from yourselves. I loved some of the Living Lab ideas, the swap shop, and like your climate action plan looks amazing. So well done on that. So I'm going to move us along now to Liam McCartan, also who's from TU Dublin. Liam is a chartered civil engineer and leads the development technology in the community research group with TU Dublin. Liam is also current chair of the Environmental Sciences Association of Ireland and a director of Engineers Without Border Ireland. Liam has co-authored a number of books, including a technology portfolio of nature-based solutions for innovations in water management, The Worth of Water, Designing Climate-Resilient Rainwater Harvesting Systems, and Where There Is No Engineer, Designing for Community. Prior to joining TU Dublin, he worked in international development, managing development programs in Africa, South America, and Asia. Please welcome Liam.
Good morning. Thanks, Una. I just check if everyone can see my screen okay. I should be sharing my slide.
Fine. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Una. So as Una said, I have several jobs, unfortunately only one salary. I'm a lecturer in TU Dublin, and I'm also one of the directors of Engineers Without Borders Ireland. And so I'd like to pick up on some of the themes, actually purely by chance, but I think some of the themes that Richard, Anne and Sam has brought up, and maybe add in a couple of questions this morning, because I've rather provocatively asked the question, are the Sustainable Development Goals actually unsustainable? So let me start by saying, as has been mentioned this morning, this generation of engineers and scientists face unprecedented challenges with the uncertainties of climate change, with challenges of living in a 410 world, 4 degrees warming, 10 billion people, and the challenges of urbanization in both high income and low income countries. And of course, the current global pandemic and most likely future pandemics and the challenges that we'll face on us. So all of these challenges are global. And as you've seen this morning, some of the innovations, the solutions are local. But, and here's the but, we need new thinking, new innovations. The traditional approach to engineering education, and that's, as I said, one side of my personality, has been quite linear. So we've trained engineers to think linearly, to solve well-defined problems within very well-defined disciplines. We need to really reimagine engineering education. And the way we say it is we need to produce a generation of global engineers who could think sideways. In other words, they're solving problems that are often at the limits of traditional disciplines. So we need a generation who's going to have the ability to invent, to innovate, not to copy, replicate, or play it safe. And often when we do workshops, the first slide we put up is the slide you see there, which is don't think like an engineer. So apologies to all the engineers joining in. I'm a civil engineer myself, so I include myself in that. And of course, underpinning all of this is the SDGs. And as Richard has outlined, the importance of the SDGs to engineering accreditation is really underlined by Engineers Ireland's accreditation strategy and the importance of integrating them into programs. And we've been working with Irish Aid, with a number of national and international partners, and with the European Union Development Education and Awareness Programme for a number of years now. And just to mention, we've developed a flexible learning module, which is called Where There Is No Engineer, Designing for Community Resilience, where students work across a range of disciplines together with local partners, on solving real life challenges and exploring this whole interaction between people, technology, and the environment. It's called Where There Is No Engineer. And really, the SDGs are a blueprint for action that you've seen this morning. And one of the success of this program has been that the students who work throughout their coursework then get the opportunity to bring the classroom back into the world. And you're looking at there some of the winning class. It's a design competition, and each college has national finals, and then it goes through to an overall final. So this is called a biochar kiln that actually the winning team in 2016 went to Nepal, and that has been picked up and is now part of the educational curriculum in Nepal. On the bottom right, you see students who are working as part of their course in product design. And what you're looking at there is a women's co-op with ActionAid, who have now integrated the product that was developed through Where There Is No Engineer into their social enterprise programs. So this interaction between the classroom and the world, I think has been one of the success of this. And not to go too much on, but just to say, if any colleges are interested in how you can integrate the SDGs into your module, we've developed a series of flexible learning modules. They're integrated now within modules across 10 colleges, right through from civil engineering, level 7, 8, and 9, to product design, to architects, and also some colleges have implemented the program outside of modules. It's supported by an online academy. So there's an SDG hub, there's a number of flexible learning courses there. And if any college is interested to explore further, or even to get some learnings from the network of colleges that are already part of Where There Is No Engineer, feel free to drop me a line. But my life is one of contradictions. Those of you who know me will appreciate. So engineering education is only one part of it, because I've been involved since 2004 in global development. And part of the work with Engineers Without Borders is working with local partners in different developing countries. And so that kind of leads me to question a little bit. And the question I raised this morning, are the SDGs actually a valid measure of sustainability? And the fact that they exist sometimes has stifled the debate a little bit. So I think picking up from Sam also, who had some of the points, if we go back and say, what actually is sustainable development? If we go right back to the mists of time, to the Brundtland report, introduce the concept of intergenerational responsibilities, or the concept that human and other forms of life on Earth will flourish forever. Or the one I like in my work is quite simple: enough for all, forever. So within that context, imagine a set of goals that every country in the world could aspire to meet, where everyone could meet their basic needs while using resources at a level that would be sustainable, even if every other country in the world did the same. So, ladies and gentlemen, Sustainable Development Goals that set the development agenda right through to 2030. And really, the way I understand the development goals in my work is it's development without borders. It doesn't matter whether you're in DCU or whether you're in a school in Niger in sub-Saharan Africa, or whether you're working over in Sri Lanka in tsunami programs, or our partners down at the bottom, Zambia Ireland, working in Kabwe in Zambia, or working over in Liberia on water programs. The SDGs are a blueprint for development without borders. And there's been a lot of critiques of the SDGs. Some of the early criticisms were that, is it actually a goal if it's unattainable? Are they too ambitious? Fellow Liverpool fans will know what this feels like at the moment. And I share some of those criticisms, but that's not my point this morning. One of the questions that was raised by Sam there in the last presentation has also been this criticism that this drive towards growth, is it actually incompatible with sustainable development? And we've hosted a webinar series with Riccardo Mastini from UPC, who is doing a PhD on degrowth, and he's one of the advisors on the European Green Deal. So I've included a link in my presentation. And that kind of leads, when I see poorer countries getting poorer and richer countries getting richer in our work, start to ask the question, are the SDGs really a blueprint to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs? Are they fit for purpose? Well, and Sam has stolen my thunder, but actually I'd like to reinforce what she's saying, because sometimes we say, what's the most sustainable country in the world in our workshops? And you get various different answers. And as Sam had said, you can hit the SDG index. Sweden is the most sustainable country in the world. Why? Because it's, according to the SDG index, it is ranked highest in the world. And you can then look at the top 5 countries. And you can go in here then and you can explore, and you can download the scorecard. Anyone doing homeschooling at the moment is familiar with scorecards. And you can see how a country like Sweden is progressing towards SDGs. You see some green good, orange could do better, red bad is the simplistic way. And you see, okay, in responsible consumption and production, some reds. And then Ireland is the 14th most sustainable country in the world. Or in other words, it's 14th on the SDG index. Very high score of almost 80. And again, you can explore and you can see how they're progressing towards different SDGs. So here's the question. The SDGs are a set of objectives, set of targets for every country in the world to achieve. Well, what if every country in the world achieved them at the level of Sweden and Ireland? What if our countries that we're working with at the moment, Zambia, or Liberia, or Bolivia? Well, let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's explore sustainability. We know we're living in a climate emergency. We know we're also living in a biodiversity emergency. The concept of human life and other forms of life flourishing forever, we have changed that model. And the consequence of both of those has been that humans are having a devastating effect on the Earth. And these are global, interconnected challenges. And this has been documented by Johan Rockström back in his paper in Nature as planetary boundaries. And sometimes they can become a little bit complex to explain, but basically there are 9 processes that have been defined that regulate the stability and resilience of the Earth system. And they're interactive. So the interactions of land, ocean, atmosphere, and life. And together they provide conditions upon which our societies depend. And they're like a set of dominoes. You tip one, you affect the one standing beside it. And so this concept of tipping points was introduced by Johan and his team, where there is a limit to the Earth's resources. And when we go beyond that limit, it's a bit like Rumsfeld and his known knowns and known unknowns, we're not quite sure what's going to happen. So again, these are big global kind of concepts that are often very hard to kind of bring to reality. And so what we often do is we work and we say, let's go global to local. And Dan O'Neill and his team over in University of Leeds has worked on a very interesting model on exactly that, and transposing these big global boundaries into per capita boundaries that you and I, or an industry or a college can understand. And again, to pick up on Sam's point there, CO2 is often chosen as an example. And again, when we look at a time span of CO2 emissions, we start to see the effects humans have had. Again, it's big global stuff, hard to explain. So what I like to do is make it personal. When I arrived into the world back in the 70s to great fanfare, well, in our household anyway, great fanfare, we were operating about 320, 330 parts per million. By the time I graduated college, we had already approached the planetary boundary. We'd increased by 6%. By the time I was working in development and just joining DIT at TU Dublin is now, we'd increased another 15%. Fast forward to today, so in my lifetime alone, we've increased 25% on carbon emissions. So this per capita boundary is often a way that we explore, and it's a way that Dan and his team has very successfully managed to capture these big global issues. And he's transposed it into about 1.6 ton CO2 per person. That's the planetary boundary to achieve 350 parts per million. And again, he's developed a very interesting toolkit. So if we look at another model, and again, Sam has alluded to these rather than the SDGs, if we look at planetary boundaries, we can have a planetary boundary index, so we can have a scorecard that similar to the SDGs, and we can look, let's pick Sweden, the most sustainable country in the world, don't forget, and Ireland, the 14th most sustainable country in the world. And I won't go into the internals today, but simple, red is bad. That's always a good policy in life. Because when you explore these and you just pick one, the CO2 emissions, we start to see something interesting emerge. We start to see actually the most sustainable country in the world has a per capita emission far exceeding the planetary boundary. So this concept of a 3 Earth lifestyle, if every country in the world was to operate like that, we would need the equivalent of 3 Earths to sustain this level of resource use. Yet, Sweden is the most sustainable country in the world. Why? Because it's number 1 on the SDG index. I know it is, I can prove it. Ireland, if everyone had the same lifestyle as we have in Ireland, we would need 4 Earths to support it. Ireland is the 14th most sustainable country in the world. Why? Because it's 14 in the SDG index. So I can go to court on that and prove it. So the question that we raise, and there's the contradiction inherent, that we have fully integrated the SDGs into our engineering education program. We work with colleges and support it, and it's a tremendous engineering education tool, 100% behind it. But are they actually a valid measure of sustainability? And what if every country in the world achieved them? Could we have a sustainable planet? And this is where I finish up on this. And I was actually listening to Mike Ryan, WHO, his video where he talks about, I don't know how many have seen it, on the vaccines. And he talks about, the drive in high-income countries now to get the vaccines and what will happen if we ignore developing countries and low-income countries. And that kind of perfectly sums up in my work what I call a sustainable development paradox, where we have a set of goals that have almost stifled the debate. And I think we have 3 choices. And I think in Engineers Ireland, we need to lead this debate. Often we tend to accept what's given. So I think the debate is, do we have a Trumpian society? Do we educate a series of engineers and scientists where I call it pull the ladder up? where we retrench. What we have, we hold, and the rich countries get richer, the poor countries get poorer. I see it all the time. This time last year, I was out in Zambia working with partners and was quite shocked at how Zambia had actually fallen down in terms of every development index you cater for. Or do we adopt, which is sometimes the Irish approach, business as usual? In other words, yeah, great. You know, we have certain webinars and we do certain things, but we don't really change radically. Or do we make a decision that we converge? In other words, that you and I and our governments change drastically our lifestyles and converge and allow developing low-income countries to develop in a sustainable manner. So I think really, if we're serious about sustainable development, and if we're really serious that it means enough for all forever, I think we need to start to reopen this debate and start to discuss and really critically assess, you know, what are the SDGs and what role they play, and do we need to have another discussion? So hopefully I've informed, entertained, annoyed enough this morning, so I shall finish up there. And thanks very much.
Liam, thank you so much for that. That was really sobering, really call to action, if you like, as you say, asking us to look at converging enough for all forever really makes one think. So really timely for you to pose those questions to us. So thank you indeed for that. If anyone has any questions for Liam, please use the Q&A facility, and I'm sure there'll be plenty for you, Liam, shortly. If I now ask Ada, Ada, do you want to share your slides there, please? Ada Guerra is Vice Director of the Alberg Center in Denmark in the PBL in Engineering, Science and Sustainability under the auspices of UNESCO, an Associate Professor within the field of problem-based project organized learning and engineering education for sustainable development in the Department of Planning. She is trained in biology and geology education, science education, PBL and sustainability, and holds a PhD in PBL and education for sustainable development in science and engineering education. Aida, you're most welcome to deliver your presentation to us. Thank you. Do you want to unmute Aida?
Yes, thank you very much. And this is quite common. I apologize for this as well. As I was saying, thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. And I was thinking now, I'm the last one, and I was hearing my colleagues and I was like, wow, so much done, so much still we have to do and everything. And my focus is actually in education, formal education. But I'm starting to question that if formal education is only the answer. If engineering education is part of the answer for sure. But so I call this sustainable development, this presentation, as a landscape of challenges and possibilities. And I actually, and I think Liam's presentation stressed this so much. There's a lot of challenges. And there's a lot of barriers. And apparently the SDGs can actually be one of those barriers if we want to be true to sustainability and the sustainability vision, right? So the focus of this presentation is this sustainability and the SDGs. They are a major trend, and I will just briefly mention this. And then I will actually move to the challenges and possibilities. And I will actually give more particular focus to the possibilities as well, in comparison with the challenges, because some of them actually overlap what we have talked and what we have heard until now. So without delay, sustainability is without doubt a major trend in higher education, and in all levels of education, one can say, and even in all types of education, formal, non-formal, informal, and so on. But if we look actually to a timeline, we can see that the vision of sustainability, not the term, the word sustainability or sustainable development, but actually the vision of sustainability is actually go back quite some centuries. If we look into the evolution of the society itself, we had slavery, and we still have, even though it's hidden in a lot of countries. But we had all this that we have a sense of actually change, even equality. 100 years ago, women were able to vote, for example. So a lot of things as part of society has changed along the way. Following this change was also the enlightenment of science and also the development of technology itself to actually make our life easy, to actually fulfill our needs. So now the question is, what is actually our need in terms of society? And I think that's where sustainability comes into play. We give it a word, we pay attention to actually what our work has been impacting the world, our activities and so on, and then we reach to the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for action. One thing actually struck me in Leon's conversation is that maybe Sustainable Development Goals is a framework for Western countries. Maybe it is. I cannot say it is, but there's a lot that we can see here, a pattern now if we look into the Sustainable Development Index clearly. And it was stressed by both Leon and Sam. So maybe in a few years, we might actually look into this and say, okay, maybe this is not the answer, even though it was developed by a huge global consultancy survey. But my focus will be actually in the quality of education. And I strongly believe that education is the foundation. It's the foundation that we can actually make a difference. It's the foundation where we can actually change behavior. It's the foundation that we can actually educate people, that we can literate people to actually act and take a position. And even this freedom of access to true information, to education and everything is threatened. And we can see now some outputs and results from the pandemic, and all this is isolation, right? So what is the challenges specifically on the higher education, specifically in engineering education? And there I pick three, and maybe we have much more. But this one was the paradigm shift for engineers' educations, the perspectives and the definitions. This is constant in the discourse of integrating sustainability and educating for sustainability in engineering education. And for example, if we look into the paradigm shift, we have this, like Leon put it very well, a very linear way, simple problems, a very reductionist and technocratic approach to the discipline and how we educate. And this is actually, this approach now is being transferred, how we tackle complex, global, wicked, chaotic problems such as sustainability problems. So we need to balance this technical. What is the technical expertise is not removed from an engineer. They need that, we need that. So that should be granted, that should be core. But there's another layers of learning that need also to come into play. And one is the contextual learning. And I'll come back to this a little bit ahead. The second perspective is on sustainability and the focus on the environmental dimension. And that's okay, I agree with the environmental dimension, that's not the problem here, or it's not the challenge here. What is the challenge here? It's that this dimension incurs the risk of become closed in itself. That means that when we tackle environmental problems, when we tackle climate dimension, when we tackle loss of biodiversity or environmental protection or waste, or we miss the relations with the other dimensions. What are the impacts on social and economical dimensions as well? How they actually are driven to the same direction. So there is a danger of missing the systemic approach, the systemic view on the different dimensions of the sustainability. And then we move back in a different type of box where sustainability is environment and technical problems. The challenge number two is actually the clear and cut definitions in relation and for engineering fields. A lot of the discourse is that this is not real engineer, this is very fluffy. If it was an equation, we already had solved the problem. And that here is really the challenge in my perspective. And the thing is that sustainability is and should not be defined as engineering objects or technology is tangible, concrete, because sustainability is contextual. And we have to have this in mind. Sustainability is contextual. And I think Leon gave a lot of examples of how we actually can solve problems in different places regarding to energy, that they are different. And the Western countries have different problems than actually the Eastern or South countries have. So we need to see this in a different way as well, in terms of how we define sustainability for the different disciplines. So a landscape of possibilities. And then I actually start looking to one thing does not substitute the other, right? So if we educate for sustainability, we are not substituting engineering, we are not substituting the profession, we are not substituting the engineer himself, the role, because we need that. So how can actually we look into the education for sustainable development and also the employability and the PBL? And PBL here is for problem-based learning. How can we overlap this? So one of the first possibilities that we should look, and we can see it as a broad one, is how do we educate our engineers? And then I have two more that are interconnect with the first one, similarly to the challenges. So if the possibility one is the key competences for ESD, employability, and PBL. And if we go back to the 90s, we have a lot of literature already defining what education for sustainability it is, what are the principles, and so on. So this is not necessarily new. And the most recent publications from UNESCO and Armin Weich from the Arizona State University kind of cluster these essential competencies. And we have the systems thinking, the critical thinking, the strategic thinking, the integrated problem solving. So problem solving is important, but should be integrated with other disciplines as well. Collaboration, anticipatory, normative, and self-awareness competencies. Thing is that if we look into the reports on what industry and employers call for, this is actually not very far away from what is actually needed for the next 20 years in terms of engineering skills. We still look into collaboration, but now the collaboration might actually assume other forms. We still call for problem-solving skills, but maybe not just solving, but actually defining and analyzing the problems. And that comes the integrated part. We also need to anticipate the changes somehow, because the market and the discipline and the field itself, it's actually volatile. It's not, and if it's fast changing. So these competencies are not very different. To actually, it's needed as well for the employability for future graduates in engineering. So how do we actually look into education and see how can education help this, take this and hand to hand? Well, we can say that we actually need to teach our students to know, so they have to have some basic knowledge and expert knowledge in engineering and sustainability and in engineering. So the expert knowledge will be within the discipline, and then they would have knowledge about sustainability. And then they will be able to act upon by bringing both together and together with other fields and disciplines as well. And then they actually should be able to contribute and to be engineers for sustainability or to build a better world. So we have here a perspective that is actually also progressive in one can say. So how can actually problem-based learning help to achieve this? And now I move specifically, we actually need to look into the variation of problems and projects. Problem-based learning and active student-centered pedagogies are gaining a lot of popularity in engineering education. And we saw that also in the posters that was presented. So that's not something that it's new, but it's this variation, having this alignment between, okay, what kind of problems, what kind of context, what kind of role and ownership students play in relation to others. And this, what will be the learning outcome from here? So we can have this variation, and this variation can also be progressive in terms of learning throughout the program, because this is also raising in terms of complexity. So it calls for different types of competencies and meta competencies from the students themselves. So how do we look this, taking just the specific example of the contextual learning through problem orientation? This is what we actually do at Aalborg University in some programs. We have a more open, broad themes, problems presented to students, or we have more narrow problems presented to students. But the thing is that the students actually need to analyze the problem. They need to gain understanding of what is the problem. And that's what we call the problem design. And by doing them, they reach to a problem formulation where they actually then move into a more expertise disciplinarity realm. That is the problem solving. So the interdisciplinarity, the complexity, the contextualization comes from the very beginning. And then we return, to that when we come back to the evaluation of solutions. So we can actually use a combination of discipline field, of a discipline expertise within an engineering field area, and then bring pairing up with also sustainability aspects. And I will just show now very briefly 2 examples. So we start, this is an example of a bachelor program in mediology, 1 semester, 3 months. They have to do this project. And they actually, this is what we give it to them. We give a theme designed from both sides of the screen, and then we give a sub-theme. So they have to bring the 2 together in their problem and in their problem formulation. And when they have the problem formulation, then they actually move into their own field of technical expertise, where they actually have to develop the technical skills. And then we go open again, we broaden up again by discussing, bringing perspectives, ethical considerations, and even technology assessment approaches. So this is also a reflective process. The other example is actually the mega projects. And the mega projects is across faculties, so it's also interdisciplinary. The previous one was within the program. This is across faculties, and the main goal, and it's explicit, is to address the SDGs. And here are 2 examples: the sustainable living and the regional, the circular region. This is actually brought to the university by external partners. And when we get to this, we say sustainable, simplifying sustainable living. It's actually quite a very broad theme. So to start here will take a lot of time, and it can be very challenging for the students. So we support students on narrowing down. So this big challenge is actually broken into three focus areas. And within these 3 focus areas, waste, green consumption, transport, and mobility, then they have a very specific, more specific problem that actually has a context within. And this, for example, is waste handling at Aalborg University. The possibility number 3, and this is the one, it's actually create these different levels of awareness from for different strategies to integrate ESD. And this is results actually of research we recently do, that we actually want to see how students have awareness and how the awareness evolved. And we have very different levels of awareness and engagement. But one thing highlighted from this is once they actually start being approached about sustainability, about sustainable awareness, what they are doing, they actually start talking about this eventually. And then they actually start paying attention. So actually making students in contact with sustainability, with sustainable development, events, activities, even visual posters, it starts step by step raising awareness. And of course, it goes back to this, to create awareness. We need to see the strategic, what kind of activities we can actually do. How can we actually reach out to these students? And I can say that the challenge at this moment, based on the research I'm doing currently, is not on the students that are actually very engaged. It's always on those that are not aware or are very goal-oriented, because they simply reply and answer to what the system asks from them. So it's this balance here, or actually make it formal, make it as part of assessment. It's actually also very important to reach to all and give to all a certain level of education. And in this sense, I think that the accreditation frameworks are very important. And what we are doing recently in this concern as well is that we are providing and developing resources for both teachers and students to move, to create more awareness, but also to get more involved and learn more about sustainability and the SDGs. And that's about my presentation. And I apologize if I spoke quite fast, but it was the question of time. And here is some of the references I have listed in case you want to know more. And that's about that. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ida, and thank you very much to all of our presenters this morning. I think the one thing that came across to me anyway very clearly was certainly the whole multifaceted issue, and that it's certainly not just a question of introducing a very small element into our modules to be able to say and claim that we've suddenly introduced sustainability. And I think that it's very important as well that it probably will involve a change in the way we approach engineering education. So we'll move on to the Q&A section. We have run a little bit over time, but I would still encourage people, if they have any questions, to put them into the Q&A section. Some questions might have been answered as we went along, but maybe we'll just have a look at some of the questions that have come in so far. Some are comments, so it's just commenting that the SDG critique is very important for Engineers Ireland to highlight. And obviously to come up with appropriate solutions then on how it can be dealt with. A question for Liam here. Liam, have you any suggestions on how we can bring the planet together in achieving real sustainability?
Hey, I'm not here to answer questions, just ask them. No, yeah, I mean, that's the core element. And it's interesting looking at Ida's presentation there and kind of the links picked up, and she said something very, very important there, that sustainability is contextual, you know, which is really important. No, I mean, the short answer is I've been asking that and trying to answer that question myself. You know, and there are a number, I suppose the thing is there are a number of people also looking at that question. I'd point people towards Jason Hickel, who has some really good podcasts. And he's one of the authors of this Human Development Index, looking at comparing the SDGs with actual human development. But he's got some really good podcasts he talks a lot about degrowth. Also, Riccardo Mastini, mentioned him. We've done some webinars with him. He also talks a lot about the new Green Deal and degrowth. And Dan O'Neill and his team, again, check out some of those podcasts and check out the work he's been doing, approaching it from a planetary boundary perspective. And I suppose the point is, all these kind of thought leaders are also looking at this, and the SDGs are a great focus. But remember what the SDGs replaced. They replaced the Millennium Development Goals. And the Millennium Development Goals were only for low-income countries. I was working and living in Sierra Leone and Niger at the time. But their approach was a baseline and a target and a measurable baseline. The SDGs are a lot more encompassing. So I think if I was going to summarize all of that, is to kind of don't let the fact that the SDGs exist be the end of the discussion. Sustainability is an ongoing debate. And I think things like this morning really are really important to it, because often they raise more questions than they answer. And I think it's a balance. And the last thing I'd say is, someone said to me once in a school in Sierra Leone, you know, that, you know, forget about this generation, it's the next generation. And I think education is really important. And because the young engineers and scientists will ask these questions themselves once they're engaged. And it's really easy to engage them around sustainability, this particular generation. So like I said, lots of things I would point you, and feel free to bounce me an email. Happy to put you in touch with some of these guys. It's a complex issue, but I suppose my main point would be, let's start the discussion. You know, let's not just accept it for what it is. Let's really question I know that hasn't answered your question, and there is no answer. It's the short thing.
Okay, Liam, actually, there is another question coming in for you as well, and it's part of a broader question, but it basically says, you know, if the best in class costs 3 worlds, are we not doing enough? And would you consider that perhaps a certain amount of degrowth will be necessary?
And actually, yeah, I'll be interested in the other panelists' view on this, but since you asked me, yes is the short answer, but this concept of degrowth always confuses people. I find it a very difficult concept to explain and to really engage with, because we're locked into a system of growth which is based on an economic model, you know, that was developed for 2-3 billion people. You know, that's where the tradition of growth and this concept that we have to have X amount of GDP growth year on year on year, and if we don't achieve it, then, you know, we need to do issues to it. Whereas actually growth, so it comes to the definition of, you know, what is growth? It's about, for me, you know, having a decent place to live, decent quality of education, decent life, you know, and they're the approaches that a lot of the guys I mentioned are coming from. But to do that, it has to be personal. So I think it comes back to bringing all these big global challenges down to personal. So for example, people tuning in today, like, are you willing to give up maybe one of your cars? You know, are you willing to make the switch to something that's going to compromise your lifestyle? Because that's what it's about. It's about personal choices. And so it's bringing it back to really personal choices. But I'd be interested to hear from some of the other panelists, because I know Sam has kind of explored this from a university perspective, and Ida touched on these also. I don't know, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so I agree we need to have personal choice, but I think personal change is not going to enable the amount of change that we need to actually maintain 1.5 degrees limit to temperature increase. And so I think there needs to be much more institutional, it needs to be top down and bottom up. So yes, we do need to have local and personal change, but I think there needs to be global change. There needs to be legislation and regulation to help reinforce those changes that are needed. On the education side, I think educating our undergraduates is great, but my concern is the urgency that's there with the scale of change that we need and when we need that scale of change. And if we wait for this next generation to come up, we will have tipped those tipping points. Or at least that's the current perceived idea, that we will have gone over the tipping points and it will be really difficult to actually reverse out of it. So we need to look at something that actually educates those current in power decision makers to actually make the changes now, because we are responsible for what's going on. So we need to make the changes and not keep kicking the can to, oh, well, the next generation will teach them better and they'll do better then. That would be my position on it.
Yeah, that's a very important point, and I think some of the statistics that you put up, Liam, were a little bit shocking in terms of how much the carbon has increased, even since since the 1970s. Ida, there's a question there in relation to obviously we've always been teaching our engineers in terms of solving problems, and you specifically referred there to the idea that we have to learn to define problems and to maybe advance that a little bit more. Have you any ideas or suggestions on how we could do that in the context of sustainability?
One of the examples I shared, and that normally what we observe is, and probably the Engineers Without Borders, it's also a very good example of it. It's not giving a problem per se to the students. It's give more of a context and a goal they should fulfill. So if they go to I don't know, to one of African countries, Kenya, I don't know, but and say, okay, how can we provide clean water, right? So this is very broad. They really need to be there to see how the entire system, from the culture, from the social relations, from everything, because we have seen in the past solutions failed because they were not developed there, even though, or the context was not taken into consideration. There's an interesting article in the European Journal that it's actually about engineering. I don't remember the author. I think it's Kelsey. But the article actually implemented the problem-based learning in engineering education. And one of the points was, okay, we first actually give a lot of information about the context to the students. So they had to solve some problem from some in India, from a specific context, but they give a lot of details about the problem. So the solution was much more technical, and the concerns of the students were about actually being innovative. Then in 10-year period, they actually start changing the approach. So this is a longitudinal study. They start removing the information they get from the problem, but rather give them access to the people. And then the concern was no longer actually being technological, innovative, or something like that, was actually to fulfill the people needs. And so I think actually Engineering Without Borders and humanitarian engineering and service learning has a lot of those examples. The problems are not they don't simply have how do you make this pump work more efficiently? That's not the problem, for example, because that's already a simple problem where all the contextual elements are removed. So they don't know who is having the problem, where is the problem, why is it a problem, what type of pumps, and so on. So there's a lot of information that they actually need to bring in to understand the problem in its origin, let's say.
Yeah. I think that's really important, the context, and I think that's coming across from all of the different panelists today. There's two questions, and I apologize that we've run a little bit over time, but I think they're two interesting questions here, and we'll probably draw a line under it at that stage. Do you know if there is a multivariate variable measurement to measure growth, GDP and other variables? Are the HDI suitable for it?
Yes, there's a couple of different models. The Good Life Index is one. The Sustainable Human Development Index is the other. Both have pros and cons, but they're the two that kind of are currently being developed at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Liam.
Just one quick follow-on. It came to mind there, and just the whole concept of developing countries and developed countries. We should remember also in our discussion that climate change is the great leveler. So food security, water scarcity, they're all challenges that we're going to now face in Ireland, in South Africa, in Australia, so the whole context of sustainable development in a traditional approach where it's high income, low income actually is changing. So that's going to be an interesting one for us to explore in the future. Sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. You're almost scaring me at this stage, Liam. Can I just move here? There's one final question, and it's the point about reaching those that are in power today, as well as, or even more than today's students, is really important. Surely scope for explicit Engineers Ireland leadership here. And Richard, that's addressed to you. Maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, thanks. So I'd say, first of all, I think what we've heard today is some brilliant examples of engineering education and its role in sustainability. But of course, the fight is much bigger than that. So I would agree that there is a position here for explicit Engineers Ireland leadership. Just to give one example of that would be that our West region just last night held a webinar with Brian Ledden, a TD, who is himself an engineer, and that was on the government's climate action bill. And I know that generated a very large amount of interest. We also, for example, recently published our State of Ireland report. Again, that's an advocacy publication, so arguing for government investment in certain areas, driven, for example, by a green and digital agenda, as well as then other engagements we'd hold with the media, with politicians, and other work, say, for example, led by our council and executive. So look, absolutely, I do see a role here for explicit Engineers Ireland leadership, and our sectors, webinars like this, as well as our policy advocacy work, would hopefully drive that forward.
I think Kevin is frozen there. You back, Kevin?
Yeah, sorry, I think I was having a problem, a slight interruption of my broadband there. Apologies for that. I think it's time to wrap up the Q&A session. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. On behalf of the Engineers Ireland Academic Society, I'd like to thank the speakers for taking the time out of their busy schedules to provide us with such insightful, timely, and dare I say it, thought-provoking presentations. I'd like to thank all of the participants who shared their examples of how they've integrated sustainability into their modules, their operations. I'd also like to thank Richard in Engineers Ireland for sponsoring the prize. And I'd like to again congratulate Beatrice and her team for being selected as the best submission. I'd like to thank the other members of the Academic Society subcommittee that were involved in organising today's event. So Anne and Abdullah, thank you very much. And I'd specifically like to thank Maureen from Engineers Ireland for hosting and moderating the event. So thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you all at some of the future webinars that will be arranged by the Academic Society. And I think it might be very valuable to even revisit our Graphical Abstract competition next year and hopefully see how the various activities ongoing around the country will have changed and modified, hopefully as a result of our presentations today. Thank you very much, everybody.